7:02, Wednesday, January 24th, 2024. This is a joint meeting of the Manchester and the Essex Finance Committees. I'll call the Manchester Finance Committee to order. I have with me Dean Nahadas, Tom Parkins, Mike Pratt, Andy Olderman, Peter Twining, and Maury Creighton is on Zoom, and I'm Sarah Mellish, the chair. Jody?
I'm Jody Harris. I'll call the Essex FinCom meeting to order. I have Christopher Wolf, Josh Franklin, Nina McKinnon, Ben Patrick, and myself, Jody Harris.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mark Renzi said he was calling in. Just so you know, I don't know.
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And Mark Renzi.
Okay, thank you. I thought I would start and then I would turn it over to, I guess, Matt or Josie.
Now it's Jody.
Well, no, but I said that you prepared the comment so that I was going to allow you to continue. It's delegating, isn't it?
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming. I appreciate you making me
Yeah.
trek over.
Thank you.
Yeah. Not a very pleasant night, but at least it's not ice.
Thank you for having us.
The other thing I thought I would do is just find out who also is in the room. So if we could go around the room and people could just introduce themselves, and if they're with a committee, tell me which one.
Teresa Whitman, and I'm on the school committee. Ann Harrison, Select Board Manchester. Lindsay Banks, just citizen.
Ruth Crane, Select Board, Essex.
Jennifer's resident Manchester.
Antonella Muniz, resident of Essex.
Jake Foster, School Committee, Essex.
Thank you. Okay. I thought I would start with a few comments and then turn it over to the Essex FinCom, whoever it might be. I attended the school committee public hearing last night and reviewed the fiscal year 25 budget deck. Since all residents had an opportunity last night to give input to the school committee on the budget, we do not intend to discuss the details of the district budget tonight, but rather discuss the funding strategy of each town for the district budget approved by the school committee next month. We know it's not final. Last September, the school committee, Manchester Select Board, Essex Board of Selectmen, Manchester Finance Committee, and Essex Finance Committee met in a joint session to discuss the funding challenges of both the school district and the town general government budgets. Manchester asked the district to sharpen their pencil, but retain existing services. And Essex asked for deeper cuts. We had hoped the district could reduce the budget increase slightly, maybe to 3.2%, rather than the normal increase, while retaining the current educational programs. We asked the school district to take a second look at the budget to see if there is any additional efficiencies. In addition, if the actual health insurance premium comes in lower than the estimate, we expect the entire amount to offset the total assessment to the towns. Even if additional efficiencies are found and there are health insurance savings, it appears the total district assessment to the towns will increase in a range of 2.7 to 3.45%. We believe Manchester voters will support that budget, but it is clearly above the range requested by Essex. Our question is, if the district presents a final firm budget with an increase in the total assessment to the towns in the 2.7 to 3.45 range, what funding strategy is the Essex FinCom contemplating to address their fiscal year 25 assessment and assessment increases in excess of 2.5% in the years to come? Pass it over to Essex FinCom.
Well, thank you. And first of all, thank you for setting this up. I think this is a very healthy thing to do, just to have dialogue between the two towns since we share such an important asset. So thank you. And also, I will say that Jody Harris is now our chair. So, but this is as of last week. So I'm happy to still getting her sea legs, but so just to, I think everybody here is kind of grounded in the history, but Essex has been requesting a 2.5% increase in the assessment, and that is before the apportionment. Right now, the school budget still stands at 3.45%. After the apportionment calculation, we're looking at 5.3% for Essex. This follows, a series of years. We were at 4.39 in fiscal 23, 3.93 in fiscal 24, and 5.31 for this upcoming fiscal 25, if the 3.45% holds. Our strategy is first pray. Maybe there's some sort of divine intervention. Maybe the health insurance gods will weigh in, but our strategy has been that we're going to have to do what we have relied on for the last 2 years, which is effectively starving our town departments in terms of the budgets. And so our town administrator, Brendan Zubricki, had requested in the submissions of the departmental budgets to target a level services budget. And we are, so we're sort of in the preliminary stages of doing that. What we had discussed from a strategy standpoint is basically bifurcating our budget. Because we all know kind of the process calculus here, which is that, if worst case scenario, we go to a super town meeting and basically Essex is sort of in a forced override situation. Our goal is, at least for this year, to try and avoid being in override territory by finagling the different town departments and trying to make the math work. It's very hard. You're all financial people in this room. When you're looking at a 5.3% budget growth number operating within Proposition 2.5, when we used up all of our excess levy capacity last year after the failed override, and we had a cumulative level of capacity from not going all the way up to our limit for a number of years leading up to this past spring. So we basically use that up. So what we're looking at now is the 2.5% plus the new growth number, which we got just before Christmas. And that was, what are we looking at? It's like $170,000. It's not going to solve our problem, but I mean, it is something on top of the 2.5%. So we're trying to do what we can for this year. I mean, the challenge really becomes year after year after year. I've been looking at the enrollment numbers. I've been dissecting them every which way to Sunday to try and figure out what the apportionment formula is going to look like as it stands in terms of the regional agreement based on the rolling off of Manchester students. If you look at the bubble years as they're referred to, and you look at the growth of Manchester students going sort of between 2009 up to about 2015, we're at the backside of that now. So as those students roll off, if you just do the math based on those numbers coming back down, and Essex has been a little bit, it's been a sort of much flatter line through the years. I mean, we're going to have this problem up until about 2028 in terms of the apportionment math working against Essex. So we are trying to figure out a long-term strategy, but it's very hard to envision something without at least revisiting apportionment. And I guess the final thing I'll say about apportionment, because I know this is sort of the way it's structured now, any change to benefit Essex works against Manchester. So it's, a zero-sum game. I think that there are things you can do to the formula that would allow for some insurance for Manchester, because I think the big issue for Manchester is potentially having an uptick in students from any sort of housing that comes online in the course of the next 5 years. So I actually think it's in the best interest of both towns to reevaluate the apportionment formula. And I think there's a few different ways to do it, and I don't want to take us down that rabbit hole in this meeting, but I mean, I think, that there's a short-term approach, which is rearranging the deck chairs basically in terms of our town's budget. And then I think there's a longer-term approach, which is looking, revisiting the formula, which I know is more controversial. But what else? What did I forget, Jody? Is there anything?
No, I think we're, taking a hard look at our town budgets. We're, doing the deep dive in the town budgets in preparation for getting backed against the wall, if you will. We have to prepare for that. We're going to look at an austerity budget from all town departments and work backwards. We all understand that last year the override did not pass. 57% of the people did not, voted against it.
Right.
When we actually discussed the operational review at town meeting, we had 63% of the voters vote for the operational review. So I think the trend is going, in the opposite direction of, if we bring an override forward this year, what's that going to look like? I think one of the things that I have asked for and gone back and forth with, Avi and then Pam, and is just an accounting of reserve accounts, what those reserves look like, why do they continue to grow when the school committee continues to close the gap on the budget with reserves from their reserve accounts, yet the reserves actually never go down. So last year, I think, was kind of a banner year for that. Avi, we haven't seen final numbers for FY23, but Avi indicated in September that the $520,000 that they used from the reserve account to close the gap of the budget actually were only used at the rate of $92,000. And when I went back and did some research, I think the number was $134,000 that was used to prepay FY24 expenses. So in theory, they would have used nothing. So in my mind, that makes the budget $500,000 heavy. And we still haven't seen E&D, which they have filed, but has not been certified yet. So I think, I think we all need to chip in a little bit here and figure this out. Essex doesn't have control over where Manchester students go, so we are less fortunate in that regard. If students are removed from public school to go to private school, that just makes our apportionment an even heavier lift. So I think Essex values education as much as Manchester does, but you can't get blood from a stone. And we don't have things like a full-time fire department to be able to, whittle down that budget. Our departments are very lean in personnel. So of our employee base, many of them are part-time employees, including, 48 call firefighters. So we do not have a full-time fire department, and that it makes a huge difference in your town. There are not a lot of places to go. You don't have trash pickup. You go to the dump. We don't have streetlights. So,
Well, the Causeway does.
but the Causeway will have a few lights.
They are improving, thanks to Jody.
But, but that's it. Don't go down the side streets because they're not going to be streetlights.
A couple of things too, that I'll just mention, and that is so Essex, about, if you exclude water and sewer, enterprise, the school is about exactly 50% of the town's budget, and I think it might be a little bit higher in Manchester. So it's fairly straightforward when you think about the math. If we're looking at a 5% increase in the budget due to apportionment, 50%, we're living within Prop 2.5%. You know, basically, if we flatlined the town services budget to accommodate the 5% for the school budget, we can make it work. Plus the new growth, there are a couple of things which are favorable. We do have some sewer debt that's actually rolling off, so that's positive. And I think we got some good news on the health insurance number recently. So that's why I'm saying we may be able to finagle this without being in override territory, but you know, we have COLAs for town employees at 2%. So, and that's contractual. So sort of the creativity comes more on the expense side than, you know, assuming personnel remains flat unless we don't, you know, unless there's open positions, which we don't fill. But, you know, those are difficult decisions to be making as a finance committee. So that's kind of where we're at, is we're sort of balancing ourselves on the top of a needle right now.
And praying. And still praying.
But I don't know if anybody other than the boss wants to share any thoughts.
I'll make two comments if I can. So one is I'm supportive of the questions on the reserves, the school district reserves. You know, we constantly hear the line from the district that we can't keep dipping into reserves. We can't keep dipping it, which in isolation makes sense, right? If you got a amount of cash in a bank account, you can't just keep taking money out because eventually it goes to zero, right? But you know, there's these dips into reserves, but yet the aggregate reserve balance across, I think it's 4 different sub-accounts, not only doesn't go down, it's growing. So to me, those two things don't reconcile, right? You know, so I think in accounting terms, it's the difference between a gross dip.
Girl. That's a good girl. Oh,
You're off mute.
okay.
That's a comment on the account.
Like, good girl, sweetheart. You did good. What a good girl. Put it back over here.
The meeting's been cut off, by the way. No volume, no image.
Gail, do you have Sarah's text in case she can't hear this?
She doesn't pick up her phone
All
during
right.
meeting. I do, but
We're
This
good.
is Kathy. I'll try and text Greg.
Thank you.
Okay.
Gail, can you hear us now?
Yeah, we can
Yes,
hear you
thank
now.
you.
Thank you, Sarah.
I
it
did.
was,
I
yeah, you
did-
muted.
Wrong. Sorry.
Back to the meeting.
Back to the question.
Back to the
Oh,
question.
yeah, sorry.
So my question is just, and I'm sure these are small amounts, but I know that, you know, we as a town have these other revenue sources in addition to, you know, property taxes and new growth, whether they be, you know, local receipts and excise taxes, and for us, beach fees and restaurant fees and Airbnb shorts, you know, all that. So my question is that just kind of like a steady state thing, or is there any growth in that revenue?
So I think the meals tax over time, we levy the 0.75 in addition for local meals tax. And that has grown over time, but we don't, or what I've been told in the past is we're not allowed to budget that in full as revenue because it does fluctuate. So, during the COVID years, you took a huge dive and then it bounced back. The governor's talking about potential increase in that to 1%, which, we're jumping up and down about. We have had a little bit of a steady increase in short-term rental. We did actually up our percentage in Essex over the last 2 town meetings. So those are the 2 places where we've been able to have a little bit of revenue, but we're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in increases in those.
Yeah, no, understood, but 50
Yep.
grand here, 50 grand there, next thing you got 100 grand, and then, so.
It's pretty.
I mean, we're
flat.
also trying to bifurcate the mill rate between
brings it.
commercial. Yeah. We're also trying to bifurcate the mill rate if that's a possibility between residential and commercial, but
And to state the obvious, the commercial will go higher.
yes, and then roughly,
I was pretty sure I knew the answer, but I'd say that.
yeah, roughly 50% of towns in the state of Massachusetts have a bifurcated rate.
Yeah.
I don't think Manchester does, but it's something we've been looking at.
Yeah.
It's not going to solve. It's like, I think, and Ben, correct me here, but I think it's only 10% of the properties are commercial in Essex, but nonetheless,
Right.
To your point, every bit counts.
Yeah, like 50 grand here, 50 grand there, right? Okay, thank you.
It's pretty,
That's
it's,
a shift. That's not a new source of revenue. It just shifts the burden.
Right.
So it doesn't generate more money. It just shifts.
Oh, you're still capped by the 2.5%.
Well, you can't, your budget's your budget. So once you set your budget, then you can do a split rate, but that'll just shift the burden from residential to commercial.
Right.
Yes, it doesn't, yes.
It
Right.
doesn't generate more dollars.
Right.
Okay, but if the primary issue is the burden on the residential
Yes.
property owners, then yes, it doesn't raise more money, but it does still help the problem.
right.
Yeah.
Right, it shifts it to our main business restaurant. So, it's a double-edged sword for them because we're already additionally taxing, even though they pass it along. They have issue with that a little bit. So I understand that.
It's probably an inelastic demand curve for the beverages that they sell, so it's probably okay for them to pass a little longer.
Go ahead, Andy.
So I'd say, as we've talked about it in our FinCom meetings, we're certainly sympathetic to where Essex finds itself at this moment. I think you, as you illustrated, Ben, in one of your charts from last September, we saw some of this ourselves, some years ago, not to the same degree, but still it was, it caused us to want to look, very closely at the district budget, so it's a natural response. And we're also, sensitive to the fact that the apportionment formula seems sometimes a little too reactive to some, maybe subtle changes in enrollment. And, we also observed that your Essex's assessed values have slightly gone up relative to Manchester's in the last year or so. So all that kind of pushes in a not helpful direction for Essex. And, certainly as a district, we can't survive without, both of us surviving. We also don't want to see, and I recognize, none of us wants to see that the quality of education goes down. That's not to anybody's benefit. And I sort of feel like it's, if we ask the district to make cuts that cause programming deficits, then that also then can have a spin-off effect of even more students perhaps not coming to the public school. So no solutions there, but just kind of an observation that, there's a problem there. I don't know whether, and maybe you've studied the apportionment formula more, Ben, but I don't know whether any sort of resolution to the apportionment formula necessarily kind of completely absolves the problem. At some point, is there something more structural that's happening?
I think there's two potential considerations for the apportionment formula. I mean, the apportionment formula is 50% enrollment
25%,
differential.
25%. 75%. No, 75% enrollment, 25% equalized valuation.
There's three.
I think it's 50, because there's census population,
Right, there's census population.
and then there's EQV,
Yep.
and then relative enrollment. And I think relative enrollment is half.
It's 25% of the instructional portion
It's weighted based on
on a 3-year average.
two budgets.
Okay, all right. So what I was looking at is the apportionment spreadsheet and then doing sensitivity analysis on changes in enrollment. And I think that when it was drafted 20 years ago, I don't think that there was a full appreciation for the degree of volatility that there can be on the apportionment ratio. And what's happened is the apportionment ratio, the rate of change in that ratio has really accelerated, and that's why there's this huge differential. And I think there's two ways of addressing it. One would be to put a cap on the amount that the ratio can change each year, but not change the underlying formula. So it's essentially, the cap would essentially just provide a greater amount of smoothing over time. And so that would be one way to address it. The other one is to change the formula itself. And like, there are two approaches there. You don't want to economically disadvantage one town, but I think, you know, the issue for Essex has just been the volatility in the change. And so we all know it's hard to manage a budget when your biggest item is 5% within the Prop 2.5 realm if you can't get an override.
But it is
So-
a 3-year average. And there has been a substantial difference in the decline in the enrollment in Manchester versus the steady state in Essex. And I'm not sure why we think that will change. That's the concern. So if enrollment 75% of the,
I mean, to come at it another way, even if we went into theory world and we said we were gonna look at the agreement, which I personally don't think we should, but you know, unless we're contemplating taking enrollment out as an input, which I don't think anybody would think that that would be the case, then, you know, like, there's the volatility aspect, absolutely, and maybe the cap thing, maybe that's a, but if enrollment is one of the 3 inputs, and you know what I mean? If there's this longer term trend, there's kind of no way around it, right?
It's very difficult. I mean, I think that there's sort of this anomalistic trend of, you know, Manchester students coming in and then rolling off at the other end, right? And that's sort of playing out now. My worry, I mean, if I was in Manchester, would be, you know, could this work against us over the course of the next decade if we, you know, if new housing is built? And so some sort of smoothing mechanism, I think, is, you know, in the best interest over the long run to both towns. I mean, you could do a 5-year, you know, smoothing versus a 3-year. Like, there's a few different ways to skin the cat. I think it's just the real volatility that I think was hard to anticipate, that we've just been, you know, struggling with.
Yep, I think that's
I
right.
think out of all the things we're talking about, going from, again, this is all theory work, but you know, going from a 3-year to a 5-year average, like some kind of smoothing like that. I mean, I just think that would be the easiest to digest, and it still might not be digestible, but I think it would be the easiest to digest out of.
But I think we should talk about it. And honestly, we're not talking about fiscal 25. We're talking about, by the time anything like this actually gets implemented, we're looking at, you know, at least fiscal 26 and beyond, which is why I think about this from both a short term and a long term. You know, short term, we do what we can do to muddle through. That's what we've been doing for the last 2 to 3 years. Longer term, I think, is just having open dialogue like we're having now in terms of what could be digestible for both towns.
But if the school continues to increase at 3.5%, which is what they say they need to maintain current level of educational programs, I'm not sure a change in the apportionment formula really helps because it's still over the 2.5. So it's still a challenge on the budget. And when I look at the enrollments, which were a high of 1562 in like 2011, 2012, and we're now down to 1100 odd, 1150. But yet we have buildings to house 1562, and we're talking about building a new building. So that's something that needs to be looked at. Because clearly the operating budget would decrease if you have one less building, one less principal, I don't know what other type of personnel. And I know that's an issue, but from a financial standpoint, one wonders if that's something that needs to be.
Well, I think we should talk about that because, I mean, obviously the emotional side of me is like, yeah, we want a new school that, that school's really old. And I know that the process has been set in motion, with MSBA in terms of a new school. I think because of the declining enrollment and because of the apportionment trend and looking out to 2028, which we know is sort of uphill. In an ideal world, to have a few extra years before that is on the table. Also, the high school debt rolling off too, which I think, which affects both communities, which it's either 2033 or 34, 2032. So, I think we should put it on the table. I don't want to be I don't know if that's the hill that I would die on in terms of, that particular fight, but it's another lever, control lever, I think.
So if I could just ask, have you talked about how you would finance the feasibility study, your share? If that proceeds, each town will have to contribute significantly towards that feasibility study. Now.
As a one-shot cost, I think,
Yes.
between our, I think we could do that with reserve. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I should just say is that sort of Essex has been pretty conservative in terms of budgeting. So we have, at least the last few years, we have benefited from free cash, which has been helpful. And we've been using that for a lot of our capital projects. But the other thing is we have done a lot of infrastructure or, capital upgrades within Essex, most notably the public safety building. So obviously we have that debt, but we also have a little bit of fatigue in terms of cost to the town in terms of our residents, which has made, I think that was part of it last year in terms of trying to get the operational override and not being successful. But
I wasn't here, I was here, but I don't remember all the numbers per se. It was my understanding where you mentioned, I know we're at the height of 1,516 students-ish, or 1,545. I thought when the high school is getting evaluated, Memorial is being evaluated, I thought that group had actually said they anticipated the district being like 1,900 students. Felt like someone had said that.
Don't know where they're coming from.
Oh, no, exactly, because obviously we're in the complete opposite direction of that, but I guess I thought all the buildings, if everything is in play,
Okay.
the space for these buildings could be for that,
Yeah, I don't remember that number.
Okay,
but
I just thought someone had said
I
that,
don't know
and
that it's wrong, but I don't remember.
and I'm going back, I'm thinking of sign, I did want to say though, Sarah, thank you in the sense of I know we've heard that there could be some savings if the insurance number changes. And then the question was posed last night, like, could savings be returned, or does the district get to use it? I certainly would say I support the idea that it could get returned to the operating budget. I also would just want to say for the committee, in the sense that from the finance committee meetings that have been publicly had, this budget does have a 1% overage in it, or excess. And the district superintendent Bowden has said for the last year over year, like, she anticipates every year that she'll have a 1% overage.
I
So
know what that means.
You mean 3.5%, Nina, or do you mean?
she means,
4.5%?
she means at the end of every year, she feels from the budget, she has 1%
E&D, basically.
to use.
Like she takes expenses and does 101% of expenses.
I don't know if she's doing that, but I just know that she said, and I know Anna
I
that,
guess,
but I'm just
right?
saying, like.
Well, that would
It's a
make more
1%
sense.
Cushion in the budget is what I would say.
Which is
Yeah.
above and beyond, there's clearly a cushion on healthcare already, there, right? So this is even 1%.
So from the beginning, I know you said at the beginning, obviously, we're not trying to question. I think we're trying to see a situation of, are there options for, let's just say, fiscal year 25, 26? We know we have to figure out something that works for the community as a whole. Also trying to find solutions that might help 5, 10 years long term. But is there a way, if we could understand that better, saying, because obviously 1% of a $30 million budget, at least my math is $300,000. And we know there was $500,000 spent, committed in fiscal year 23 that wasn't spent. So it's like, there's a lot of unknowns, and you have a town, obviously, that is praying. And, really trying to see, not questioning that we're not questioning our want of a good education, but trying to understand, or trying to explain to the community how to support it if we are asking these questions.
I mean, I think that the town of Manchester realized a few years ago that we were being too conservative on our revenue estimates and maybe too liberal on budget expenses. So we've trimmed that way down so that, because we were having a lot of money go to free cash. So we've tried to be really rigorous about that on our end to have the budget reflect what we should be taxing people, because we don't want to collect extra money every year, and knowing that it makes the budget more volatile on our end, but at least you can justify why you're spending what you're spending. And yeah, I agree that there needs to be.
And on top of that, I think you can afford to have a sharper pencil when you have the amount of cash in reserves, right? That's, there's all different kinds of buffers, right? But you can be sharper on this side if you've got the cushion, right?
I'm just gonna check and see. Can I just check and see if Maury has any comments? Maury's still on?
I am. Thanks, Sarah. No, I'm listening here and I don't have any comments. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a first.
It is a first, yes.
He's speechless.
Go ahead, Ben, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I haven't seen the audited financial statements for the district as of the end of fiscal 23.
I think they were released.
Were they?
Yeah, they're on the website.
They weren't yesterday.
Are you sure?
Well, I checked yesterday.
Because the question of what the question around the reserve balances ending, we should be able to definitively look at those numbers to see the growth of the reserves relative to the budget ask, and get some data over the last few years in terms of the whether it's 1%, or whatever it may be. Because I think, all three parties, both towns and the district, to the extent to which we're not over padding things, we have to be sensitive to, given the interdependency.
I don't see their audited financial statements online. I've been checking for E&D, which has not been certified. So we're still waiting for things, and I think we're still waiting for the receipt of the final numbers from fiscal 23. Just from an operating budget standpoint, we usually, I think, have expected them. I prefer to see them quarterly. I prefer to see them monthly, I guess, just so that we know which way we're trending. Not that it's, we have control over that, but it's nice to know along the way. And we're not seeing that. I think in Essex, we went into regionalization needing each other for different reasons. Essex without a home for our high school students, and we had moved them 3 times. Manchester, because you wanted more robust program, and you had small class size. That was just being a region was the first pillar. The second pillar was the building of the middle high school for our middle high school students. We knew that was first. We knew that Memorial would be second. It was, I went back and looked at the reports. And thank you, Greg, you got some of those old things for me. In the basement, I think. Because we didn't have them in our basement. But, these things we're anticipating. So Ben talks about fatigue for voters and support. So, having Essex Elementary come up for MFBA, floating to the top of the list and doing a feasibility study is a necessary evil, whatever it leads us to. It could lead us to, oh, well, maybe we just need to make Memorial bigger and all of our elementary students need to go to one school, and that would necessitate an opening of the agreement. So quite literally in Essex, regionalization was sold, and I can guarantee you that this is a fact because I told it at 7 public forums. It passed in Essex because of the promise of K-5 staying in your town. And Manchester wanted the same thing. They wanted their young children in their district, in their town, not to travel, between towns. I understand times have changed, but from a, older generation taxpayer, that's what they were expecting. And, that's what they're hopeful for. And I think that in looking at our debt schedule and seeing what's rolling off, and I think we've been incredibly conservative. And I know we're struggling for operating budget, but by 2030, 2032, we should be in much better shape to bring on more debt if that's where the feasibility study leads us to. But I think you can see voters having fatigue right now if they're teetering on the edge of the 1950s building that, quite frankly, Essex did a really great job of maintaining along the way because it's the only thing we owned. And we had a superintendent K-8 for our own for a while, but back in the day, we shared one with Manchester before we were region. Foster Ball was a shared superintendent. So these are things that we built this district on. So I want to be really careful when we talk about, nixing Essex Elementary School. It's on the table. We understand as financial people, it has to be on the table. But we also need to understand that you have voters who you've made promises to along the way, and now you get to the end and you're already making capital improvements to the middle high school, and we still have a 1950s building. That the district is trying to feed capital expenses into to keep the boiler going and make sure that there's a backup boiler and try to bring in some technology that every other kid in the district has, but we don't have the infrastructure there to really support it. So I think Pam's doing her best to keep it there, but that's a PR issue with voters.
But also I think that I agree with that. And I understand the basis of the inception of the district. But I also think that Essex taxpayers need to understand that the cost of doing that is a higher operating budget. And it makes no sense to add to infrastructure if you can't afford the operating budget to run the system. That's the challenge.
And I think that Essex has some funding situations, and I think you must too, but, and again, I'm new, I'm a hot minute in this chair seat, get like a hot minute and a half. But, you know, we've been funding OPEB consistently. We're looking at, you know, hopefully in 8 more years, we're fully funded. When we are fully funded there, if we go at the rate that we're going at, which is around 250 a year, then we have 250, and our current expense line for retiree healthcare is 150. So there's $500,000. Then our Essex County retirement assessment, when I looked at that and I sat down with our new town accountant, so we have a new town accountant and a new finance committee chair meeting together on these numbers. So we're doing great, and we have no Avi yet, you know, so we're cobbling this together. But I sit down and talk about the Essex County retirement assessment, and then I'm told, well, a good portion of that is unfunded liabilities from prior years. And how much is that? And maybe Greg can fill me in, like, when is that obligation?
Similar timeframe.
So another 8-ish years.
Early mid-30s, that'll be fully funded.
But
And-
I guess without interrupting, and I,
Just hold on 1 second. As a percentage, Greg, of what we're getting as an assessment from Essex County retirement, because nobody got back to me on that.
Oh, it's the majority of
But isn't it supposed to be going down to like 4% or something?
it. It will, it's slated to go, it's growing about 7 to 8 right now for
Okay.
another 3, 4 more years. Then it'll step down, in theory, depending on how the market does,
Right.
steps down to 4%, and then it'll go away. It'll drop off significantly. I mean, it'll be more than a 50% reduction.
Okay, so there's another, so I'm, you know, I've got rough math going over here. I'm not Ben, so I operate down here. So, you know, there's another $800,000. We get out of the budget crunch with meeting all of our obligations and having been incredibly conservative along the way, you know, paying for our capital expenses to get to the point where, you know, we're on better financial ground. So we look to be struggling. Like somebody was saying this to me today. It's funny, you know, I called our reserve accounts the envelope method, right? We tuck money away in reserve accounts to be able to pay for capital expenses. That's just how we do things in Essex. We know we're going to need a fire truck. We know we're going to need an ambulance. We know we're going to need, you know, a dump truck. We're
We have
saving.
like a dozen different reserve fund, or, you know, specialty funds.
Don't you have one for the schools also? Did I
We
see
have
that?
an apportionment fund,
We have $50,000 in.
which we don't need 2/3, by the way, to use now because of that change. There's a change in the law, so just a simple majority, we can use that. But yeah, we have an emergency vehicles fund. We have a, you know, repaired town hall fund.
So we, you know, again, incredibly conservatively, but looking forward and trying to do the rough math quickly for my 4 meetings this week. You know, cobbling together, what does that look like? What does that debt schedule look like? You know, how do we free things up to be able to not be in the position we are today of, we've got $365,000 of, you know, 2.5% growth, you know, and, you know, a little bit of new growth. And we pray for more people to come to restaurants for meals tax. Yes, you know, we hope we're not going to be in that position forever. But we also feel like we've been good stewards along the way of supporting the district and paying our share of capital expenses that are, you know, owned by the town of Manchester. And I think taxpayers will look at, you know, they would like that too. And the feasibility study is blind to all of those things, and that's great. That's where we'll land and how decisions will be made. But I think that's where you can't get blood from a stone. And we've struggled. So I think it's a big picture, and I think you have to paint the big picture and remember it, because together we're better. We will continue to be better together. And the shoe has been on the other foot a few times. And there has been Greg's nodding, there's been a failed override before this. So we've been through some bumps and we're in bumpy territory.
So I think that's same lens on operating expenses should also, let's not forget, it seems to be sort of diminished, that a layer of 40 or $50 million of new municipal debt between the towns is even more burdensome. So that same lens that you're looking at, the operating expenses between the two institutions, there's a significant layer of bond amortization, bond interest that potentially should be brought into that equation.
And unfortunately, with the speed up in the schedule for the Essex Elementary, that's gonna bring those new bonds on much earlier than either of us wished for.
Yeah,
It could be a middle ground to not say that Essex shouldn't any longer have an elementary school, but rather maybe the project gets deferred.
That's what I would like to better understand, because we've just put a lot of things on the table. OPEB, the retirement, the Essex County retirement, the debt, the debt mapping, at least looking at Essex, but I think, Manchester is subject to that as well because of the district. There's a lot of things, and getting back to the operating side, the apportionment roll-off for Essex, which, is sort of like will continue, but then stabilize by 2028, all things being equal. So I think deferral by a few years might actually.
But it could also be deferral as well as, and again, we're going into an area certainly none of us know if we're looking at purely fiscally, the two of us, FinComs together. Our residents are, I think it's 1,127 students. It might be off by 10 for the two towns. To what Sarah said, do we need?
153.
I know it's 1199 with school choice. Do we need 4 buildings for less than 1,200 students? If Essex Elementary, and maybe it can't be done for fiscal year 25, but even if it was temporarily shut down, because then you can be creative. If it's one thing to say taxpayers were promised something 25 years ago, we have to look at where we are now, looking forward for 10 years forward. A person last night at the meeting said, what are we going to be doing for families looking forward? And I guess I just look at it as the creativity of if enrollment goes up, maybe it's a different, not school district, it's a different step. I've heard Pam say it could become a junior high, et cetera. It also could be an opportunity that the towns become more of a community because the kids are in school together. Whoever thought 12-year-olds coming together, it's a great, good idea. Nearly didn't have 12-year-olds at that time because that's a really tough age to be coming together. So all of a sudden, maybe it's 3rd grade, who knows? It gives us the options for creativity. And I would think there would be significant operating saving if a building is taken offline.
It'd be interesting. I'm not sure how the state would view that when you come back around in 5 years, say, and try to have another project. But I don't have any issue with what you're suggesting.
I think that's one of the things we want to understand
Yeah.
is like, what are the implications? Like, is there a path to defer? And I'm not saying, and maybe the answer is you go through a certain number of things now, feasibility studies and whatnot, because part of what the feasibility study might reveal are questions around, the physical plant of the school itself and the ability to build something new simultaneously to having kids in the school. There's not a lot that can be done around the perimeter of Essex Elementary because there's a lot of wetland around there. And so then there's this question of like, well, is there an alternate site on Apple Street? And there's a bunch of questions none of us have the answers to, which the feasibility study will shed light on. So I'm not saying we push the whole thing off, but is there a built-in point with which there can be a deferral before we're actually, putting down on our balance sheets. And so I think we need to know that, and I think we also need to know, and this may again be part of the feasibility study, what is the operating, how does that impact the operating expense? And if you're busing kids, you know, to another community, et cetera, and like the fixed versus the variable cost, is it really a lot of savings? Because you would raise, Sarah, about the, you know, okay, there's the apportionment issue and volatility, and we're struggling with that, but then there's the actual budget number itself. And, you know, I've always said, I realize that it, you know, it's the cost of running a school district is going to run higher than, you know, most other departments. Again, all things being equal. But you know, the 3.5% on an ongoing basis is sort of, you know, is a struggle when it turns into 5.5%. After the apportionment, you know, versus 2% or whatever it might be for Manchester, so.
Well, and I think we also have, we've had incredible decline in enrollment. And the peak of enrollment was predicted by the school committee when I was on it in 2002. You know, not that we knew what was going to happen in 2008, but if you build a new school and you have, you know, a crash in the economy, you know, you're going to have the perfect storm of, you know, families storming the gates, bringing their kids back to public school because you have a better product now and you have brand new building. And in fact, that's what happened, and our enrollment peaked. But then our enrollment has declined almost 25%, but the operating expenses haven't really declined, you know, at the same rate. So I think that brings us sort of to the operational review that Essex did vote to $40,000, that we're still looking, you know, to do some piece of that, because I still think, you know, we're not really looking at the teaching staff or whatnot, but there may be operational efficiencies. I can think of one that in Essex years ago, the superintendent worked really hard at transportation for out-of-district placement. And he worked with surrounding communities, and I asked Avi about this a year or two ago, and I think the answer was, we don't really have time to do that type of work to see. And if you look at the warrants, you'll see, you know, a tremendous amount of out-of-district transportation expense. So I think we're, you know, thinking about things like that, or, you know, can you, here and there, we're not going to find millions of dollars, but I think it would be best practice to have a look at that. And they've had the same auditor for 23 years from the, you know, Powers and Sullivan is who I worked with when we had trouble with not passing the audit in 2002. So we recently had an auditor change in Essex, and it was quite a difference in the procedure, so.
And if I could just jump, one other thing that's a middle ground here. The light of a repair in Essex Elementary, no one wants to spend $1 million on a new boiler. But it's not just a new boiler. Perhaps it's another 2 or 3 years to get us into that swale of bond amortization. So you are getting benefit. You're actually getting a capital markets benefit from extending that life, from putting some CapEx into the building. So again, there's value not just in the repair, but also in the time that we're all alluding to, that we're all trying to get into the 33, 32 timeline.
Yeah, better to plan for it than have emergency repairs.
But usually these reports have, you know, doom and gloom scenarios about boilers and roofs, but you are getting something in addition to the repair on this facility. You're getting some more time. So it gives us room in that amortization schedule.
If there is any, you know, if there is any sort of real traction on deferring the project, you could talk to MSBA. They have a repairs program, and you could ask to transition into that.
I mean, I've been a strong proponent of the district review. I mean, right from the beginning, and I still feel very strongly about it. It doesn't make sense to do unless we have participation with the district and that the school committee is on board with that. And I think that the goal and the objective should be, not at the behest of the towns and just looking through a financial lens, but thinking about how everything is structured and relative to, best practices within other districts, particularly with declining enrollment. And by the way, that Manchester Essex is not unique in terms of the declining enrollment. There's declining enrollment across the state of Massachusetts demographically. For some reason, it seems to be more extreme on the North Shore. I don't know why that is, but I've looked at other communities and I've been looking at enrollment numbers, and we're not really unique. I've seen 20% declines in other districts as well. So
I think the challenge with seaside communities is you tend to have people move into town and stay, so you have a higher percentage of your population is elderly with no children.
and that would have only been exacerbated, I think, in the last few years with the,
Exactly.
transactions have
Yeah.
gone way down.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And the prices in Manchester have gotten so expensive that there are no starter homes.
But I think that whatever comes out of the district review it should be helpful, particularly in thinking about Essex and, if we're looking at an operational override, it should give reassurance to residents that, it's just another set of eyes that have kind of looked at what's being done. I would think that that would be really helpful for residents. It would be for me just to have a third party, because I can't really dissect all of the numbers, and I don't know enough about schools to be able to do
Right,
that.
and we definitely supported it, but our challenge was on our town meeting floor because the school committee did not support it. That we had people.
And residents feel threatened by it because you're like,
Right.
oh, well, it isn't,
Right.
going to result in
So
a
it went.
degradation of program or something,
Yeah,
Yeah, I myself support it. To me, it's just kind of a cost benefit, right? You look at the cost of it versus the potential benefit. And what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is you spend the money, get the audit, and everything is tip top, A++, right? Then you come away feeling,
Right,
Right.
then you have a win-win.
right? I mean.
but that benefit
That's worst case.
is disproportionately, that would be a greater benefit to Essex because we're on the higher priced side of the formula. So to have a third party saying, you know what, this is best practice. And the budget is what it is, and you need that to have a quality education. Manchester residents are not feeling that degree of pain that the Essex residents are feeling. So it's not surprising to me that what the result was of the move.
At the moment. Right, I mean, well, we have more protection than you. We have a sewer contract with Gloucester for like a 40B, or MBTA communities aren't going to be forced down Essex's throat. We have a contract with the city of Gloucester. Brendan was smart enough to have a special act when we entered into that contract so that we can't be forced with a 40B to go onto the sewer system. So we have a few more protections, but we also don't have a lot of places for new growth. We have limited sewer connections. We're on the marsh. We have a lot of bumps in the road to be able to expand our community. And, just FYI, every time we bring on another child in the district, it doesn't help us in that vein. And remember, we're still working on zoning. So we only have,
but our 40B was not on sewer. They were gonna have to pay millions to connect to the sewer system.
if you ask our realtors, they'll say there isn't a smidge of land left in Essex that would, we'd be able to put a decent septic system on to make it a meaningful new growth. So, but yes, I understand that.
And that's a good 10 years ago. Plotting very slowly.
The 40B,
Right?
40B.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, that's years away from a decision.
It's been with HAC for a year and a half.
So they'll finally have a hearing in March, and then it'll be another year before a decision is issued. and then it'll be appealed to the courts, and that's another 5 years guaranteed.
Yeah,
How
but,
about
that
MBTA?
being said, we could wake up tomorrow and there could be some new 40B that we don't know about right now, right?
No, they can't come in while this one's pending, I believe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're protected as long as this
Oh, all
one's.
right. Okay.
But what about the MBTA community? What does that mean?
I think what you have to look at in Manchester is Manchester has had zoning by right in the general district for 50 years for 3 families in an existing structure. We haven't seen the development. So the question is are a lot small enough that it doesn't encourage a developer to come in and buy up lots of lots to build a big development? We don't know. But, you know, that's something being looked at is how you construct it in a way to not exactly encourage development to the extent it's possible, but, you know, we don't know. We don't know. And we're hoping for cell signaling to give us some commercial revenue.
When does that come online?
It hasn't been approved by planning department yet.
Okay.
It's planning.
Probably a couple of years away.
So knowing that there's not blanket agreement by everybody to open up the agreement, but what is the process by which that would happen?
School committee has to do.
School committee initiates.
Is one way, and there's also town petition.
Yeah, you
You
can
can
always
do
do a
town
petition.
petition with a 10% signage petition to put it on a town warrant, but you need, it's a process.
Yeah, no,
What is
it's
the
not a
10%? I didn't hear.
10% of, I don't know if it's registered voters, I can't remember the exact language in the agreement, but there are two avenues, but truly, you know, it's, at this point, it's school committee's job to, if they're, I think if they're having trouble funding the, you know, the budget in 2 towns, you know, you are hopeful that then they, you know, recognize that if this is an ongoing problem, then, you know, maybe it's time to take a peek at, you know, what's going on, if this is, you know, systemic. So,
Well, I'm just throw it out there as a what if. So if there's some interest in slowing down the process for Essex Elementary in order to get to the early 30s when OPEB and Essex County and the high school debts, all those items are off the table. That frees up significant money for both communities. So significant. Enough that it would more than cover the debt cost of the new school. Is it possible to think that there could be an override for operating now that gets us through that basically an 8-year period? Is that conceivable? Is that sellable? I know you can't definitively give an answer. I'm just curious about people's reaction.
I'm Christopher. I don't know most of the folks here, sorry. So I usually play the role of loyal opposition on the finance committee.
It's good to have that.
Sounds like me on Manchester.
And it's either Mark Renzi or I lose each vote 6-1. Another loyal opposition. We tend to be at different ends of the spectrum. I don't think it's sellable if we don't sell it. And I don't think we've done a very good job of selling the need for an override. I think Essex is close to unique on the North Shore and not having had a meaningful operational override in 17+ years.
It's highly unusual.
I think the school's done a great job. I think both towns have done a great job. I think the schools have done a great job. I think it's just the bill has come due. And I think personally, I have strongly been in favor of an override. Again, loyal opposition. But you know, you look at our neighbors, Hamilton and London, they've had 4 in the last dozen years. Their rate of increase is much higher for this regional school district than ours, and they don't get better outcomes. I just think that personally, I think the bill has come due. We can argue about apportionment, we can argue about EQ, you know, the particulars of the formula, but at the end of the day, we have a wonderful school. We've got 2 great communities. The burden feels a little more painful in Essex at this stretch. It has in other periods in Manchester. That does create some problems. Because we've been so conservatively managed, we also have actually fabulous free cash flow. I know it's not good practice to use that for operating, but that's also another thing that can be considered as a bridge. I personally would vote for an override first because I think it's better. I voted for it. I still have the stickers on my car. Now, to be fair, if you don't know me, Sarah Wolf, Teresa's predecessor, was chair of the school committee during the COVID years. So I have a very strong bias in favor of everything they've done. But also both towns have run really lean and really well. I just think this is the cost of doing business. And when inflation was averaged 5 to 9% for the last 2 or 3 years, trying to stick to 2.5% because that was the tax law from 40 plus years ago during stagflation. Is it sellable? I don't know. I don't think we've tried to sell it. But there's a lot of bias in all of those comments.
Mark,
I
do
would
you want to say?
just, I guess, yeah, so I would just say you have to put the lens on of definitely selling it. But the question for Manchester is, if we went into this, collectively and created assets in Manchester under the premise of, replacing an asset that we had in Essex. If we go and sell raising our taxes above the, the override level, it's a pretty hard sell saying we're not going to build Essex, we're not going to do an operational review, but we will increase the budget. And then for everyone who is a finance professional here, which is almost everybody, the question is not this year, it's next year and the following year. So you can't just ask us as fiduciaries of the town to go and say, hey, it's an override just for, this next budget. We have to have a perspective as towards our trajectory. So if we're going in and saying, hey, well, let's vote for an override, and then somebody says, are we going to build Essex Elementary? What's that look like? And then we say, that's really something we're going to maybe pushing off, or we're not willing to do an operational assessment. I think you have a much harder sell. I think if you say, hey, we've done the math, it only looks like it's 1 year. We're also factoring in, doing an operational review to make sure that we're really truly need it. I think you have it's a much easier sell. So it's just the perspective and lens. Like, how do you do it regardless of this is anywhere USA. It doesn't, you can just, take it out of the context of our two towns. So I just throw that out there. And then I'm not against an override. I'm against doing things without our eyes wide open.
Mark, I just want to build on that point, actually, because you said something that is exactly what I was thinking to Greg's question about an operational override, which is that I think we have an opportunity, all of us sitting here, to actually think about a 10-year trajectory, and the solution may be multi-pronged, and the solution is some combination of doing a review of the district, potentially deferring Essex Elementary, potentially an operational override, and revisiting the apportionment. It all kind of fits together. And I think if we can present something that's cohesive in terms of how all of these things fit in with the ultimate goal of preserving the highest quality district we can, and we are in agreement as finance committees, at least in terms of making a recommendation. Obviously, we don't really control voters or select boards, but I mean, I think that would go a long way as a starting point, is just think big picture and think about doing all of these things. And because we've talked about it each one, but we can't look at each one in isolation. We have to have a master plan.
I think that's, I think that's an excellent thought. I think some sort of holistic plan that does, as you say, address the next several years, because even if you were able to convince people of an override this year, they have it in the back of their minds that, yeah, what about next year? You know, what's coming then? So if you can sell, you know, this is our FY25 plan, and this is how we're thinking about the next years after. And by the way, in 2032, we've got these various things rolling off of our budgets.
Yeah, and to add to that thought, that's exactly the spirit of it. But to add to that thought, we took a very objective view that we had an operational assessment, and the operational assessment said X. It said either it's doing fine or there's something to change or whatever it says. It's just an objective third party that has no emotion in it comes in and tells us, hey, like, you can go to your tax base and say this with a straight face, or whatever the outcome is. So I think it's just good, prudent planning, and that helps sell it, because it's absolutely appropriate to do the best that we can in relatively affluent or very affluent communities to have a great school system and spend a lot of money. However, we just have to say, yes, we acknowledge that enrollment is down. We acknowledge these things, but here's why this makes sense. And here's why an override makes sense for next year. I just think we just need to be careful that it doesn't become every other year, because then I think it becomes, it becomes too challenging. And we also have, as everyone here also can acknowledge and easily pull up in any statistics, so we have two different demographic bases between the towns on average. And so there's just, we have a different composition in the towns. And, another overlay, and I don't remember who was speaking in the beginning, but, we also have aging demographics in general, and that may be attributing to, the decline in enrollment on top of other things. But those are just things that we should think about. And if you have an aging demographic and people are staying put because, as we can read the Wall Street Journal, housing has been more and more of a challenge, so people may not be moving, it might not be as transitory. That means that, we may still have a trajectory of declining enrollment. And the last point I'll make is we continue to talk about budget changes, but, our budget change year over year, if it's, let's just say it's 3 or 4 or 5 or 10%, does that make sense if we continue to have declining enrollment? Do we need to make that a little bit more logical? So, and if we did it on a commercial basis, the answer would be yes. If you have a declining revenues, you're trying to cut costs. So it's just, all of those perspectives need to be woven in to make sure that we're selling an override, so that people can say, yeah, we did our homework.
Could be an update of the school master plan that might be useful in that way.
That's what I'm thinking. There's sort of a merging of plans for both towns and the district in terms of all of these considerations. It sounds easy in concept, right? But then when you actually figure out how to do it.
10 years from now, we'll figure it out. Oops, a little late.
And so in the regional agreement, it does say that except for withdrawal of a town member, the majority of the vote, so let's see, 10% of the registered voters could bring forth a warrant article. Not that I think that's a healthy way to do anything with the regional agreement. It's just written into the regional agreement. And the regional agreement was, a lot of it was boilerplate, right? And I mean, it was, we stole it from Mass General Law and we put it from other regional agreements. And I mean, it's really just was cobbled together.
Much better to look at other agreements.
Correct.
Massachusetts general law and put something together that reflects our study rather than just making it up. Would have been easier.
Yeah. Well, but that was 24 years ago.
Jody, just on that 10%. So the 10% is supporting for a warrant article, asking the school committee to do what?
To change the regional agreement.
To change it. Now, is telling them how they want it changed, or in fact, asking them to look at it?
No, let's see, in very small print.
I never
On your
nailed
phone
it.
versus
Getting
your.
smaller as the years go by.
I told you, I'm on my fourth meeting this week. It's been a tough week. And I'm learning. I learned from the team. Can you read it, Ann? Thank you.
Even large enough print that I can see.
Thank you.
So I get my books in the library.
The paragraph in question is in section 6 amendments. And it's the second paragraph. It says any proposal for amendment, except for a proposal for amendment providing for the withdrawal of a member town, which should be acted upon as provided in section 8. I think we're not talking about the withdrawal of a member town. So
Yeah.
that part is irrelevant.
Yep.
So a proposal for an amendment may be initiated by a majority vote of the committee or by a petition signed by 10% of the registered voters in said town. So one town, 10% of the registered voters, according to the most recent voting list, and the number of signatures on the petition, which appear to be the names of registered voters of said town and said petition, shall be presented to the secretary of the committee, the school committee. In either case, the secretary shall mail a notice in writing to the Board of Selectmen. So whether it comes from the committee or from the 10%, each member send a notice in writing to the Board of Selectmen of each member town that a proposal to amend. This is not to open up the agreement. This is a specific proposal to amend this agreement has been made and shall enclose a copy of such proposal without the signatures in the case of a proposal by petition.
So there is a proposal.
Yep.
A specific proposal
Yes.
as to the amendment.
For
Thank
The
you.
selection of each town shall include in the warrant for the next annual town meeting or special town meeting called for the purpose of an article stating the proposal or the substance thereof. Such amendment shall take effect upon its acceptance by each of the member towns. Acceptance of each member town being by a majority vote at a town meeting aforesaid. So,
Thank you.
yes, 10% of it. Can't put it on the warrant for both towns, but both towns have to accept it.
There's a mechanism. Do we want to use it? No, we probably don't want to use it. I don't think anybody wants to use a mechanism like that. Because I don't think anybody even wants to talk about, they don't want, I don't think anybody wants to withdraw from the district. Because we'll say it again, we are still better together, even if Essex is struggling.
I think it's all pretty easy to do procedurally if we have a cohesive. You know, I mean, that we're not doing things piecemeal. You know, an operational override in a vacuum or, you know, a district review for the sake of a district review, like that has to be to inform a series of actions that are potentially contemplated, you know, for the betterment of our collective communities. And I know that sounds vague, but I mean, you know, we've put a lot of things on the table and I think we just have to create a plan out of it. But I think if we have one, then I think the procedural aspect is much easier to sell, to say this is part of a bigger plan, yeah.
So who would be tasked with making that? Is this a subcommittee between the two committees?
I mean, I would like to see subcommittees on a few of these different ideas that we've talked about. Like, I think there's a subset of people around apportionment. There's maybe a subset on the question of Essex Elementary and the timing on that. And that may just be a matter of getting answers. But,
Where's the school committee on all, where's the school committee in this conversation?
Well, I think that's,
they should be,
I think you would want them on the subcommittees, right?
right.
And I would think it would be mixed membership too, between Essex and Manchester.
Right.
Since we have the chair of the school committee here,
Yes.
perhaps we could ask her if she thinks there might be any type of appetite. this type of approach.
For the recording, do I need to come up there to talk?
No,
Okay. So that type of approach, I can't speak officially for the committee, but I can say that, based on my experience, that yes, that sounds like something that there would be appetite for if what I'm understanding is the idea of representation from the different pertinent boards all gathering together to problem solve together. Yes, I know that there's appetite for that to take place. I think that without that, and without a real clear understanding of what the attempt is, what's the outcome attempt, it's going to be hard for the committee to understand some of those individual pieces, like an operational review. That was one reason that we didn't take a position before the town meetings. We didn't go for or against because we weren't clear on what was the intent, what were you trying to learn? And since then, with the additional money that Essex did appropriate, the invitation remains. If you tell us what you want to learn, we can then discuss if that's something we can support and work together on. Nobody's stated to be against any of these things, but I think if there is going to be a long-term plan like that, it would be great. And I do think that there would be appetite. I do also know that there is a lot coming up in the district. Last night, Pam did mention a couple things that next year we have 2 major reviews that we're already in the queue for. One of them is a NEASC review of the elementary programs. And the other is, I forget the actual designation, but it's a special education instructional review. And they're so intensive that the DESE review that we had talked before about bumping up and speeding up, they actually won't consider, like by statute, they can't consider taking us on since the district is already engaged in these other 2 reviews at the time. So if there is something else that's going to be asked to be taken on in that way, we do need to know rather soon in order to schedule out these other reviews that are already scheduled to be underway. We want to make sure we're not overburdening the resources of the district in this. And there are some things that have to be done and some things that want to be done. So we do want to make sure that we're doing that. So a big picture plan would be really beneficial, I think. And the most beneficial part of that would be to have representation and voices all together at the table. If you are interested, I do have a couple answers to a couple of the things that were coming up, if that's sure. Just as a heads up, the E&D submission has been posted on the website, so that is out there. You can get those numbers. The audit statements for this year are pending, but we've bumped up our audit review. That's going to take place on March 6th at our March 6th meeting. So our auditor will come. As part of that, he's actually going to do a walkthrough on the reserves. I hear you on the reserves question, people wanting to know what the balance is. And we've got loads of these reports, but they're not always easy to find. And you have to know which meeting you're going to, and that I hear you on that. It's questions that committee members have as well. So he's actually going to do a walkthrough on some of that with our committee. And of course, that's an open public meeting, so people are welcome to attend that as well. As far as the current balances, though, those are included in the tentative documents for the budget as presented last night and previously also. Just regarding enrollment, the enrollment right now that we're at the tail end of that spike, which we are, those bubble classes rolling through, enrollment now is about pre-spike levels. So when the district was formed and for those first years, this is about the level of enrollment for those first 7 years or so. We're at about 2007 levels, and that's when you started to see that spike go up, it peaked, and now we're at the tail end of that. So enrollment wise, we're about where we were. So this is a comfortable level in that way. That said, there have been reductions made. I don't need to bore you with all of that in order to right size for that. But it is true that there did have to be expansion in some areas to accommodate the bubble classes there and to come back out. Regarding the 1% conversation at the end of the year, there's not a purposeful padding of the budget in terms of planning in an extra 1%. And I just want to be really clear about that. It's not an intentional add. It's basically that you create your budget, but also conservatively creating the budget, not adding extra, knowing that over the course of the year, you want to come in the black. You don't want to come in the red. We don't want to ever have to turn to the towns mid-year and ask, or have to use alternate sources for that mid-year. But that's just where the average happens to be. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little tighter. So that's just where we happen to average coming out in the end. The question really that I have that would maybe be helpful in this moving forward with this group discussion, subcommittee, however you frame it, is that when the district was formed, the two towns effectively voted to create a third municipality in forming the regional school district. And that third municipality has to stand on its own as an entity. So far, in the past 13 years or so, or since Pam and Avi have been around, their intended strategy with this municipality has been to take its lead from the member towns. So keeping reserves around 10%, knowing that that's been the case. Sometimes it's been a little higher, sometimes a little lower, same as for the towns. Keeping borrowing capacity and all of those things appropriate to a standalone municipality, recognizing that we are interconnected. So as time goes by and we have these questions about how much should the district have, keeping in mind that that's where they were taking the lead from on this, was that it is a standalone entity, technically taking guidance from what the two towns are doing. So if that intention is shifting, that's something we can all talk about together. As Sarah mentioned, I know that the flavor for reserve levels in Manchester has changed, and that conversation is changing. And I think that's appropriate. And I know that our committee members have expressed interest in understanding that too. So I think that there's definitely appetite for addressing all of these things together. The together part is the key as a team. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a question, Teresa. I'm not seeing E&D certified.
No, it's not certified yet. The submission is on there, so you
Oh, we
have
knew
the
that.
information.
Yes, no, we're waiting for certification.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would imagine we could certainly reintroduce the financial assessment as part of our upcoming budget. But I'm curious, in the process of talking about that for last year's budget, there was one for Hamilton Wenham that was shared, and it was this massive document, which seems almost like overly cumbersome. And I'm wondering, is there sort of a lighter on its feet kind of assessment that we might target to answer our questions?
Yeah, that document's like 300 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was from 2011.
Yeah.
It yielded.
Or request somebody to be more succinct.
Yeah.
Yes.
More targeted in what they're looking at. I
We're
think
not-
they looked at athletics, they looked at, I think we could hone down what we're looking for.
Or contract so that we're not paying by the page.
100%. And I think that I think the reason that the school committee did not have the understanding of what the scope of work was for the first go around was because Ben had offered to do the scope of work for.
It was not collaborative.
Yes.
I mean, I'll be the first to say that. So I mean, I think if we can revisit the objectives in a collaborative way, that's the first approach. I almost feel like I'd like to sort of look at some of the other levers before actually going to this, because we might be more deliberate in terms of, what the goals are. My instinct was very basic initially, which was just looking at our district relative to similar districts and to what extent do we employ common practices or best practices, because I just don't know enough about practices. So, but that's pretty rudimentary. I just like to have a third party look at how operations are done and say, well, that's typically, this is typical or this is atypical. That would have that would be helpful for me. But I mean, we can certainly refine it. And if we can all sort of get on the same page, I just think that that would be part of, it needs to be synced up to a longer term vision in my mind. And I think the request in working with the district, it needs to overlay the towns, both towns' financial obligations looking over the next 10 years, as we've been talking about tonight. So.
Teresa, did you have something you want to say?
If it's all right, and if, again, the question has come kind of over and over again. What is the question we want answered? And since the district itself is already underway with a number of reviews that continue to pile on, which is appropriate and good. If there are specific questions that you all know you're looking to have answered, that might be a first stop rather than trying to come up with a broader plan. But what are the specific questions you're trying to answer? Because it may be that information lives somewhere already in the mountains of reviews that are available for free and that we already have. And then that might refine, okay, well, what is the information we really can't get and be able to target that way. If the question is, can the district be run for less money? The answer is yes. The district can be run at any level of money. It's living with the consequences and the outcomes that come with that we have to wrestle with, right? So the question does come back to what does reasonable mean to these boards? What is the 3 to 3.5% target range? Is that still considered reasonable? But if 2.5% is what's considered reasonable, we don't need to spend money to find a 2.5% budget. That can be done at any level. The question becomes, what do you support as a reasonable growth percentage?
I think the challenge we have is we're being asked to give a reasonable number. And we don't have the information behind it of what the consequences are for various percentages and how that impacts the educational programs. So we're coming from we want educational programs. You tell us the most efficient way to fund it. Is kind of where I'm coming from.
It's where it also, I mean, I don't know the difference between the must-haves, the nice-to-haves, and the really nice-to-haves in terms of looking at a district. And I don't have the context of, you know, whether we're high on the really nice-to-have or we have the must-haves relative to other districts. I just don't have the knowledge for that. So I find it really difficult to look at a budget through a lens where I don't have that context.
That's what you're looking for from the review.
Right.
The must have.
Common practices versus best
As an
practices.
outside third-party review to take that
Right.
unbiased look.
I think we're looking for financial, operational efficiencies without sacrificing services, which I know that's a lot to put together, right? But, and maybe the answer is there's none, right? But who knows? Maybe, you know, maybe, right? And I get, this is a bit of comparing apples to oranges, but like on the town side, I don't want to go in because this is a very heated, you know, but I think of the regional 911, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that saved us money and it did not sacrifice services, right? Because you could still dial 911 and people are going to show up and it saved us money. Now, you know, is that the silver bullet unicorn and there's no such thing on the, maybe, I don't know, but I'm just, I'm giving you that as a kind of an example where there are sometimes financial operational efficiencies that do not sacrifice services, sometimes.
Okay.
They're rare.
Maury Creighton has his hand up.
Final.
Yes,
Maury?
I've been sitting here and listening quietly and patiently, all very, very good comments. As the Manchester FinCom's heard me say over the years, this district has worked. And essentially there are three entities, of course, the two towns in the district. And mechanically, what typically happens and has happened is that the school committee and the district provide the two towns with a bill, one for operating and one for debt, and we vote on it up or down. So I think having an independent audit is a very smart thing for both towns and for the district. And I appreciate your comments, Teresa, on specific items, but you know, we're 24 years into this district at the moment, and having sort of a third-party audit, or third-party review, I should say, I think would lend a lot of credibility to how the whole thing is working. And I fully support that. And I think it would be good if the committees worked on a way to get a reasonable outcome from a review. And it would probably help us for the next 5 or 10 years, and would frankly help us as we roll into thoughts about an additional facility and what's the long-term multi-year plan going forward. So that's just my thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. And I would add a third topic area. I mean, you had mentioned operating and financial. I would also say governance as well, because in my mind, that has to do with the interplay of the different parties in terms of how everything gets managed. And I know if you look at the DESI template for, you know, the DESI does these reviews and they have a list of topics, and governance is one of them. I think looking at, you know, 2 town districts could be helpful as well in terms of the norms of how all the parties kind of work together, just for me. It may be more clear.
Just, can you expand? I'm just curious. I mean, I understand governance, but what exactly? I'm just.
Decision making, like what is the framework for making decisions between the towns and the district?
So in other words, if we did a peer review of us compared to Lincoln Sudbury, I'm just picking that because I live there, you know, their governance structure might look different in terms.
I don't know. That's it would be helpful for me to know that. But I mean, if we're just sort of doing a wish list for that.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I've talked to other regional school districts, school committee members, FinCom members, Board of Select members, and different districts handle things differently. I've had FinCom members tell me that they give their marching orders of 2.5% to the school district, and that anything up above the 2.5%, their marching orders are, it's for you to fight for on town meeting floor. And that's what you're going to manage to, and then everything above and beyond that, you're going to justify. And so I think different towns and have governed like the budget in different manners, and everybody has their own issues that they're dealing with. I mean, but there are different ways, and I think we've been in the position of sitting back and waiting for the budget to see what that looks like, and then handling it in our 2 towns. I have to say, this format of discussion is really great.
Oh, good.
From my perspective, because I like to talk to real people, real time, and.
Are we not real in this?
We're real, but instead of, listening to your meeting and having a dialogue of, what we're facing and what you're facing and your viewpoint, I just want to say that I truly appreciate the opportunity to do this.
You got a question from Kathy?
Kathy Bellata, you have a question?
Hi, this is Kathy Bellata, 21 Pine Street, and a member of the Select Board. I just wanted to take the opportunity to really thank both FinComs for getting together in this format. I found it incredibly helpful as both a resident and Select Board member. So thanks to all of you. And I would just ask a favor. I've heard the discussion around the independent review or audit, discussion, and I think that's all appropriate, but I want us to be cautious about our language. And I personally have felt that the use of the term audit is not helpful. And when Ann and Greg can correct me, but when the Manchester Select Board discussed this in preparation for last fall's town meeting, we discussed it in terms of an independent review, a fresh set of eyes, which any well-run organization would welcome. And I would just ask a favor that we consider not using the term audit, because I think that has a negative connotation that can unnecessarily cause people to think of negative consequences that we're not trying to achieve. So we welcome a fresh set of eyes, independent review. And again, I thank both FinComs for getting together in this forum.
Thank you, Kathy. I totally agree.
That's a good point, because
Yeah.
in the private sector, you pass the audit or you.
And it just implies finance, really.
Ruth, did you want to say something?
Just adding, kind of piggybacking on what Kathy was saying, she mentions the word audit and it resonates with me that it feels negative, like we're looking for wrongdoing in the school. And I don't think that the intent was ever that, no one thinks they're hiding money or that there's something evil going on. I think it was just more about looking for ways to find efficiencies, maybe tighten the budget, close the gap. What can we do better? Because everyone can do something better. So I agree with Kathy and I appreciate that she said that. And I will equally continue to not use the word audit. Review.
Yeah, as a former auditor, I would like to take great. Duly noted. Thank you. Just for the record.
Review is a good word, review.
I like review.
Review is
Independent review.
So it's almost 9 o'clock. Where do we go from here?
So I think that the approach of this kind of multi-pronged,
And your master plan.
yeah, kind of master planning process, I think is a really good outcome of meeting tonight. And so I think if we could sort of leave understanding what those different pieces are, and then maybe we could gather together the right folks along with the school committee to have some participants in those efforts. I think that would be a good first step.
You want to take a stab at it?
No. I'm not a note taker. I defer to those who are.
Well, I think there's three items. One is the looking at the apportionment question from different angles. And I think that one's particularly hard because how do you find different approaches that are going to be acceptable to both towns? And and you have to think 10 years, I think, in looking at that. But I think that is important. I think there are some questions around the timeline surrounding EES and how that timeline actually works. And is there sort of any opportunity for kind of a built-in pause? And Teresa, maybe you have an answer right now.
I have a partial answer. So EES is under the MSBA process at the moment. We are in the eligibility period. And so right now, the time is to understand, should we be invited to a feasibility study? Will we have the two town support on that? I think a key factor here is that hearing all the different things we're talking about, the feasibility study seems like a really smart move for us because we're talking about different configurations during the feasibility study. Should we be invited? MSBA does not like us to get ahead of ourselves. They were very, very clear about that. So should we be invited into a feasibility study and towns and district choose to fund it? The different configurations that keep Essex where it is, renovate or replace a new site, which has been proposed a couple times now within Essex or moving back to Manchester, all of those options and extended enrollment, deep dive projection, that'll all be part of the feasibility study. So there's a lot in there. Not everything, perhaps it's not going to comp our program across, like regional districts, but there's a lot in there. And so since we are already in that, I think it would be smart to sooner rather than later make a determination on that. I know that the Essex Board of Selectmen did already vote Monday to put an article on the spring town meeting warrant for funding their portion of the feasibility study.
But I think a separate question is within the project, the program,
right?
Is there an opportunity to slow the process down?
So there's an opportunity. We could back out. I mean, technically, you could stop at any time. I guess what I'm saying is, given the things we're trying to learn, if what we want to do is create a better timeline with open eyes about what the options best would be, we should probably try to engage with the feasibility study and then make that decision. Because we don't have to vote on long-term funding for this for some time.
But
But
does
what
that
are the
push the first domino down? In other words, by pushing the first domino down, are we leading to the,
Right.
the next 20 falling? I
We've
think
already
that's
got
what,
2 dominoes down.
No, but what are the consequences?
That I
We do
can
the
find out more.
feasibility study.
Yep.
And then decide,
Pause.
Right.
we want to
Maybe.
pause it, not cancel it. And I don't know if that's allowed under the program.
That we can find out.
Okay.
Or the timeline in which they, keep you in the funding queue, but you're not drawing on it yet. And maybe your build, is a 2-year delay.
That's
because
more what I was gonna say. Could you, like, in the application process, basically say, yes, we're applying now, we're checking boxes, we're doing all the paperwork, but we want T plus 3 years. Like, that's like our plan, not
Surely there are,
plus 0,
right,
you know?
surely there are answers to this because the towns don't vote on funding the project or moving forward until after the feasibility study. So surely there are towns that have faced this and I can get the answers to that.
And I've never seen, I could pull probably the feasibility study for Memorial, but do they make a recommendation or do they provide options?
Andy can speak best to this, I think.
Speak to that.
They assess options. So it's as part of any sort of MSBA funded school building project, the presumption is quite often that it's a project that happens, to replace that current school in some fashion or to upgrade it. So they ask you to look at a repair project. They ask you to look at a renovation addition, and then they ask you to look at a new school. So the firm that's hired to do that study, that's what they look at. I think to kind of have them factor in other questions is a bit of a curveball. And I think I could ask some others that know better about the process in my office, about what the options might be.
This is just based on the conversation that I've had with Pam about this, because this isn't the first time we've talked about,
Yeah.
Some of these kinds
So
of
maybe
things.
you can check into that.
Yeah, I can check into that. Yeah.
But I agree with you, the feasibility would be help to inform kind of
Right.
what the
What
big
direction
picture
we be
is,
going.
yeah.
Yeah, because honestly, the firms are in the business of the end product design and construction process. So that's a different question than, say, you want us, that's where when I was mentioning the master plan effort before, that's really kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, where is the district going? What are their needs? Let's forecast what we can know about the enrollment and also, the condition of the 2 towns. And, there could be a lot to learn from that.
And it's almost a 6-year process between beginning to end. If you went straight forward, looking back at Memorial, that's what it looked like, it's almost 6 years. So we're more than a year out from, probably almost 2 years out from getting the results of the feasibility study.
Yeah, usually the feasibility study happens, might happen, say, at the first of the year, and then we're kind of going through and you get to what they call schematic design, which has you assessing a particular design, and that gets estimated. And that estimate, that budget is what goes before the 2 town meetings and gets voted on, and that's where the project is really kind of passed.
I can leave a couple flyers about the process with all the modules for anyone who's interested.
I would like to just process a lot of what was discussed tonight, and I think maybe send to the 2 chairs some thoughts about sort of how do we work together and what the different sort of sub-component areas are, including the district. And then I would hope that we could meet again, maybe next quarter or something, to whatever timeline is going to work.
May I ask a question? We do have Superintendent Pam Bodren joining us. Would you like her to speak to any of this? Because she probably knows the most real-time information.
Pam's hand is up.
Yeah, I think we have what we need, but Pam, do you have some thoughts you'd like to respond to?
Nothing on the budget per se, just on the MSBA process. I think we just need to be mindful that the projected timeline we're on now would lead us to a design for full consideration, probably in the fall of 26. And if throughout the process, let's say during feasibility, the towns make a determination that they are not ready to go forward, we will lose our place in line for the potential, 30% reimbursement. And we will have to start the process again by reapplication. That's not to say that I don't know if there's an opportunity at some point to talk about the timeline, but they really do impress upon us that the process we're engaging in is showing our readiness for participating in the program.
Okay, thank you,
That's all I
Pam.
wanted to share.
Thanks.
And there'll be more information forthcoming in the entire process. One more piece that's good is, you can surely pull together a subcommittee for your own purposes, but the process under MSBA requires the school committee to seat a building committee that will then independently drive this process forward.
Okay,
Okay, thanks.
thanks.
Thanks, Pam.
Anything else, or are we ready to adjourn, and we'll go back in our meetings and kind of talk about things and see if we can kind of rehash it and see what, yes, Greg.
This is just it's a tangent. But I have a captive audience here, so I'll take advantage of that. So we obviously focus on school, but the other obviously side of the equation is town expenses. And I know that in Manchester, we have a number of retirements that'll be happening over the course of the next few years. Maybe some opportunities that we want to have discussions about shared services, expand and look at ways, are there some efficiencies on the town side that could help in this whole equation? So.
Greg, can you give us an example of one that, comes to mind? Just to spitball, just to chew on it?
Council on Aging, for example. My retirement date is coming up. Brendan really wants to buy it off. But you could restructure, you can have one person do both jobs, but if you had one manager and one assistant at a slightly lower level, and you could have some efficient, there's just some options.
So management.
It's like anytime you
Shared services.
merge two organizations, the efficiencies you find tend to be.
Well, we've got so many partial FTEs in terms of the, need, or in terms of actual people.
Yeah.
For responsibilities.
Longer term, you're not ready for this because you're doing well with your call fire, but at some point, that's going to become a real issue. And that probably will become an opportunity to have a real serious discussion. And that's down the road.
Maybe we could move your new fire department to Southern Ave somewhere closer to school.
Anyways, I'm not looking for answers. I just want to throw that out there. I wanted to take advantage of having you sitting here.
Police station and fire station all flooded out twice last week. Town hall.
I flip it on its head. I think it's like any of them, not immediately, but if you
Everything goes
look,
on the table.
if you look enough down the road, then you look at retirements and you look at, I think, anything could be envisioned, really, any department.
Typically, you need those options on the shelf ready when the opportunity arises.
Exactly.
That's sort of my point.
Have discussed it before the retirement occurs.
Because if someone's out the door, you're panicked about filling that slot. So it's something that takes a little forethought. So again, something to think about.
That's why you have the term interim.
That's true.
That was the other business not anticipated by the chair.
Sneaky Greg. BZ's gonna be upset he didn't get a chance to weigh in on that one.
Yeah, I'm sure. Brendan and I have talked, so I'm happy to talk to him.
So I have a motion for the Manchester Finance Committee to adjourn.
I'll
Mike
make that
makes a
motion.
motion. Who seconds it?
I'll second.
Tom seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion for the Essex Finance Committee to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Mike, I came in late.